Have you ever dreamed of leaving the noisy city behind for a peaceful, quiet life in the countryside? Well, what if I told you that the countryside is actually louder, wilder, and far more chaotic than the busiest city street? Today, we are diving into the reality of country life, and I promise you will see a side of homesteading that those beautiful, aesthetic social media accounts desperately try to hide. We moved expecting absolute tranquility, but instead we found ourselves fighting on the front lines of a literal invasion. It is a paradox, really. You move to the middle of nowhere to find peace, only to discover you are suddenly at war with nature itself. Stay tuned, because later in this video, I will reveal the one secret about traditional wood stoves that completely shattered our romantic illusions. Before we get into the madness, let me know in the comments right now, would you ever give up your modern conveniences to live off the land? Or do you think people who do that are totally crazy? Let us see where you stand. To truly understand how we ended up in this crazy situation, we need to go back to the very beginning. A few months ago, my partner Iwonka and I finally took the plunge. We bought a beautiful, slightly run-down farmhouse surrounded by old trees and endless fields. It was the absolute dream. We had visions of drinking morning coffee on the porch, growing all our own organic food, and baking fresh bread in the antique wood-burning stove that came with the house. We knew it would be hard work, but we thought we were fully prepared for the rustic lifestyle. However, what we did not realize was that this old house had been standing here for over 80 years, and in that time it had developed its own unique ecosystem. We were not just buying a property, we were stepping into a territory that had already been claimed. Let us dive right into the biggest illusion about packing up and moving away from the city. You see those beautiful videos online, right? The ones where someone is wearing a spotless linen outfit, carrying a woven basket full of perfect vegetables while soft music plays. Let me debunk that specific myth for you right now, because the reality of country life is completely different from a carefully edited montage. Our first week here felt like a massive slap of reality, especially when we realized that nature does not care about our cozy plans. For example, consider the simple act of opening your front door. In the city, you step out onto a clean concrete sidewalk. Here, you step out and instantly sink into ankle-deep mud because it rained for 20 minutes 3 days ago. The romanticized idea of a pristine, effortless rural existence is just a marketing trick used to sell lifestyle magazines. The truth is much dirtier, much louder, and requires a level of physical endurance we simply did not have at the start. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared us for what happened next. We thought we were just dealing with a bit of dirt, but we were about to face a situation that would test our sanity. So here is how the nightmare actually started. It was our third evening in the new house. The sun had gone down, the crickets were chirping, and everything felt incredibly peaceful. Then we heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from inside the walls. At first, we tried to ignore it, telling ourselves it was just the old house settling or the wind blowing through the attic. But that is a dangerous myth to believe when you live in the country. Old houses do not just settle with scratching noises. The next morning, we found the first piece of undeniable evidence on the kitchen counter. We had left a loaf of bread out, securely wrapped in plastic, or so we thought. Half of the loaf was completely chewed through. This was not a single lost creature wandering inside. This was a targeted operation. For example, if you leave a single crumb of food out in an old country house, you are essentially sending out a dinner invitation to every wild creature within a 2-mile radius. We quickly realized that we were not the only ones calling this farmhouse our home, and our uninvited roommates were getting very bold. Things escalated faster than we could ever have imagined. It was not just 1 or 2 field mice looking for a warm place to sleep. It was an absolute, full-blown invasion. Within 48 hours, the scratching in the walls turned into loud scurrying across the ceiling. We started finding evidence everywhere, in the pantry, under the sink, and even inside our dresser drawers. It is a common misconception that keeping a clean house will keep pests away. Let me break that myth right now. You can scrub your floors until they shine, but if there is a hole the size of a dime anywhere in your foundation, they will find it. For instance, I watched a mouse completely flatten its body to squeeze under a door gap that looked impossible to pass through. We were completely overwhelmed. We had moved to the country to escape the stress of city traffic and deadlines, but now we were facing the intense anxiety of trying to protect our food and our sanity from hundreds of tiny, determined invaders. It was bad, really bad, and we had no idea how to stop them. In our absolute panic, we turned to the internet for a quick solution, which is usually a terrible idea when dealing with homesteading problems. We bought into the myth of the modern, chemical-free miracle cure. We ordered 6 of those expensive ultrasonic pest repeller plugins. You know the ones I mean. They claim to emit a high-frequency sound that drives mice and bugs crazy but is silent to humans. Let me use this moment as a clear example to save you some money. Those things are completely useless. We plugged them into every room, expecting the invasion to retreat by morning. Instead, I literally caught a mouse sitting on top of the device, grooming its whiskers as if I had bought it a tiny, vibrating massage chair. Relying on passive, easy solutions in the countryside is a recipe for disaster. The country demands active, hands-on problem-solving. We had to roll up our sleeves, buy traditional traps, seal up dozens of tiny cracks with steel wool, and physically reclaim our house inch by inch. It took 3 exhausting weeks of daily patrols to finally get the numbers down. While we were fighting the great indoor battle, we also had to figure out how to feed ourselves. This brings us to the centerpiece of our rural dream, the antique wood-burning kitchen stove. When we bought the house, I was obsessed with this stove. It is a massive, heavy iron beast that looks like it belongs in a museum. The myth here is that cooking on wood is this deeply soulful, naturally intuitive process that just makes food taste better effortlessly. Well, let me give you a harsh example of reality. Turning on a modern gas or electric stove takes exactly 1 second. Starting a fire in a wood stove, getting it to the right temperature, and maintaining that heat takes about an hour of constant babysitting before you can even boil an egg. You do not just turn a dial. You have to understand the specific type of wood you are using, the airflow, and the outside weather because wind changes how the chimney draws smoke. We quickly realized that our beautiful antique was a highly demanding full-time job. The daily routine of using the wood stove completely changed our lives. Before you can cook, you need wood. And not just any wood, but properly seasoned, dry wood cut to the exact right length. There is a saying that wood warms you twice, once when you chop it and once when you burn it. I am here to tell you that it actually warms you about 5 times because you also have to stack it, carry it into the house, and constantly clean up the bark and dirt it leaves everywhere. Many people believe the myth that living with a wood stove means your house always smells like a cozy winter cabin. Here is a real-world example for you. On our second attempt to make breakfast, the wind shifted outside. Instead of drawing the smoke up the chimney, the stove burped a massive cloud of thick, gray smoke directly into the kitchen. Within 10 seconds, the smoke alarms were screaming and our eyes were watering so badly we could not see. We had to open every window in the house, letting in the freezing morning air just to breathe. Learning to regulate the temperature on the wood stove was easily the most frustrating experience of the first month. Unlike a modern oven with a digital thermostat, the wood stove has hot spots and cold spots that constantly shift as the logs burn down to ashes. Let me share a perfect example of our naive cooking attempts. We decided to bake a simple loaf of bread. According to the recipe, it needed 45 minutes at a steady heat. I loaded the firebox, got the oven thermometer to the right spot, and put the dough inside. 10 minutes later, I checked, and the temperature had dropped by 50 degrees. I threw in some smaller pieces of kindling to quickly raise the heat. 5 minutes later, the oven was blazing hot. By the time the 45 minutes were up, the bread was burned completely black on the bottom, raw in the middle, and tasted strongly of ash. The myth of effortless rustic baking died that day. You have to become one with the fire, constantly watching, adjusting, and predicting what the heat will do next. The constant demands of the old house, the endless battle with the invaders, and the exhausting learning curve of the wood stove pushed us to our absolute limits. We needed a break from the indoor chaos. That is when we established our most important daily routine, the afternoon walk with Iwonka. Stepping outside the house was like stepping into a completely different world. The contrast was genuinely shocking. Inside, we were stressed, smelling like smoke, and constantly looking over our shoulders for mice. But outside, the countryside finally revealed the magic we had originally moved here for. The air was incredibly crisp. The rolling green hills stretched out for miles, and the silence was deep and restorative. There is a common myth that country living is entirely isolating and depressing. But as an example, when Iwonka and I walked down the dirt road behind our property, listening to the wind and the trees, all the stress of the morning melted away. It was during these walks that we remembered exactly why we chose this difficult path. Walking with Iwonka gave us a chance to actually talk and process everything that was happening. When you are constantly reacting to crises, like a smoking stove or a chewed-up bag of flour, you stop communicating with your partner on a deeper level. You just bark orders at each other. During our walks, Iwonka shared her own perspective on the massive changes. She admitted that she was terrified the first night she heard the scratching in the walls. But she also pointed out something amazing. She reminded me of a clear example of our progress. In just a few weeks, we had learned how to identify different animal tracks. We successfully baked an edible batch of cookies on the wood stove, and we had learned how to work together under bizarre pressure. The myth that homesteading will instantly fix a relationship is false. It will actually test it to the breaking point. But if you can survive the initial shock, the teamwork required builds a bond that is stronger than steel. These walks became our daily therapy sessions, away from the demanding farmhouse. As we found our rhythm indoors, and the invasion finally started to slow down, our attention naturally turned to the outside. It was time to tackle the garden. When we first looked at the property, we had this grand, sweeping vision. We imagined a massive, perfectly organized plot with neat rows of vegetables, towering tomato plants, and a charming little white picket fence. We bought into the myth that the soil in the country is naturally perfect and ready to grow anything. Let me give you a harsh example of the truth. When we finally took a shovel to the area we had designated for the garden, the blade bounced right off. The ground was not soft, fertile soil. It was tightly packed clay filled with rocks the size of bowling balls and a root system from weeds that seemed to go down to the center of the earth. What we thought would take a single weekend of light digging turned into a grueling, month-long excavation project, just to prepare a few small garden beds. The physical labor of starting the garden was staggering. We chose not to use large, heavy machinery because we wanted to do things the traditional way, which was our second big mistake. Breaking ground by hand is an incredible workout, but it breaks your back. There is a very persistent myth among beginner gardeners that once the seeds are in the ground, nature does the rest of the work for you. You just add a little water and wait for the harvest. Here is a perfect example to shatter that illusion. After weeks of preparing the soil, we lovingly planted 3 rows of delicate organic lettuce and spinach. We watered them, watched the little green shoots appear, and felt incredibly proud. Then, a surprise late spring frost hit overnight. The temperature dropped unexpectedly, and by morning, our beautiful little plants were reduced to black, slimy mush. Nature is not a gentle caretaker. Nature is brutally indifferent. You have to constantly protect your crops from the weather, the wind, and the relentless sun. And speaking of protecting the crops, the frost was only our first enemy in the garden. Remember the invasion we fought inside the house? Well, outside, the enemy was much bigger and far more hungry. We quickly learned that a vegetable garden in the country is basically a free, all-you-can-eat buffet for local wildlife. We woke up one morning to find that a family of deer had leaped over our temporary fence like it was not even there. They systematically ate the tops off every single one of our young pepper plants. For example, if you look closely at the damage, it is almost impressive how neatly they trimmed the leaves, leaving just a bare, sad stem behind. The myth that country animals are shy and stay in the woods is completely false. If you are growing sweet, tender vegetables, they will come right up to your back porch to get them. We had to completely rethink our strategy, building taller fences, using natural deterrents, and accepting that we were always going to lose a percentage of our harvest to the local wildlife tax. Dealing with the weeds was another monumental challenge that nobody properly warns you about. In a small city garden, pulling weeds is a relaxing weekend activity. In a large country garden, it is an aggressive, never-ending war. The myth is that if you mulch heavily enough, the weeds will not grow. Let me tell you, the weeds on this property view mulch as a light snack. For instance, there is a specific type of creeping vine here that can grow seemingly 6 inches overnight. If you turn your back on the garden for 3 days, you will come back to find your carrots completely choked out by a massive green carpet of invaders. We spent hours on our hands and knees, baking in the hot sun, pulling weeds until our fingers blistered. It forces you to be incredibly present and observant. You cannot just plant things and walk away. The garden demands your daily attention, just like the wood stove, and just like the old house. Everything out here requires constant maintenance. Despite the brutal reality of the frost, the deer, and the endless weeds, the garden eventually started to teach us a very important lesson about patience and resilience. It is easy to get discouraged when things fail, but country life forces you to adapt. We stopped trying to grow delicate things that required perfect conditions and started focusing on tough, resilient crops that loved our specific soil. The myth that you can force nature to conform to your plans is the quickest path to misery on a homestead. Instead, you have to observe and work with what you have. A great example of this was our potato crop. We literally just buried chunks of potatoes in the rocky soil, threw some straw over them, and essentially forgot about them while we dealt with the house. To our absolute shock, they thrived. It was a chaotic, messy patch, but it was incredibly productive. We learned that success out here rarely looks like a perfect magazine picture. It usually looks a bit messy, but it works. As the months passed, a strange thing started to happen. The chaos became our new normal, and we actually began to prefer it over our old city life. The massive invasion of mice inside the house was finally under control. We still caught one occasionally, but we no longer panicked. We just handled it as part of the routine. The myth that you must conquer nature to live comfortably is totally wrong. You do not conquer it, you just negotiate a slightly better boundary. For example, we learned to store absolutely everything in heavy glass jars. Our pantry now looks like an antique apothecary, not for aesthetics, but for pure survival. The daily chores that used to leave us exhausted and frustrated slowly became comforting rituals. Chopping the wood, clearing the ashes, checking the perimeter for pest entry points. These tasks grounded us in a way that staring at a computer screen in a city office never could. We were finally starting to build real resilience. Even our relationship with the terrifying wood stove transformed entirely. The beast that used to fill our kitchen with smoke and burn our bread became the true heart of our home. We stopped fighting it and started understanding its language. The myth is that modern convenience is always better. But let me give you a specific example of why that is not true. On a cold, rainy evening, there is nothing in the modern world that compares to the deep, penetrating heat of a cast-iron wood stove. We learned how to bank the coals perfectly so the fire would sleep through the night and gently wake up in the morning. We finally mastered the oven temperature, baking the most incredible, crusty sourdough bread that tasted slightly of wood smoke and hard work. When you put that kind of effort into a single meal, your appreciation for food changes completely. The food tastes better because you literally poured your sweat and time into preparing it. The garden, with all its heartbreak and hard labor, finally offered us its ultimate reward by late summer. The moment you harvest a meal entirely from your own land is a feeling that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not done it. The myth that supermarket vegetables taste just fine is instantly destroyed the moment you bite into a tomato still warm from the sun, grown in soil you prepared yourself. For example, Iwonka and I stood in the middle of the garden one afternoon, our hands covered in dirt, eating fresh sugar snap peas right off the vine. They were incredibly sweet and crisp. In that moment, all the back-breaking weeding, the battles with the deer, and the early morning watering felt completely justified. We were not just living in the country anymore, we were actually sustaining ourselves from it. The land was finally giving back to us after demanding so much from us in the beginning. Looking back at those first chaotic weeks, it is almost funny how naive we were. We thought moving to the countryside meant early retirement and peaceful reading on the porch. The reality is that it is the hardest job we have ever had. The myth of the quiet country life is exactly that, a myth. The reality is the loud buzzing of insects, the cracking of wood, the wind howling around the old farmhouse, and the constant physical activity. But here's an interesting example of how it changes you. A few weeks ago, we had to drive back into the city for some supplies. The noise of the traffic, the harsh artificial lights, and the rushed, stressed faces of everyone on the street felt completely overwhelming. We could not wait to get back to our muddy driveway, our demanding wood stove, and our slightly messy garden. The hardships of country life had fundamentally rewired what we considered to be a good, meaningful life. Our daily walks with Iwonka have completely changed their tone now. We no longer walk just to escape the stress of the house. We walk to observe the subtle changes in the seasons. We notice which wild berries are ripening. We track the patterns of the birds, and we check the perimeter of our garden not with anxiety, but with a sense of stewardship. There is a myth that you eventually conquer a homestead and the work is done. The reality, as we have learned, is that the work is never done, and that is actually the beauty of it. For instance, knowing that winter is coming means we have to start chopping more wood now, preserving the final garden harvest, and making sure the house is sealed tight against a new wave of mice looking for warmth. But this time, we are not panicking. We are prepared. We know exactly what to expect, and we know that we are capable of handling whatever nature throws at us. So, if you are sitting in a city apartment right now, dreaming of buying a farmhouse and living off the land, I want you to really think about our story. Do not move to the country to find an easy life, because you will be completely crushed by the reality. The invasions are real, the wood stove is unforgiving, and the garden will test your soul. But if you are willing to abandon the romantic myths, if you are ready to put in the exhausting physical labor, and if you want a life where every single meal and every warm fire feels like a massive personal victory, then it might be exactly what you need. It is a life of extreme highs and extreme lows. We did not expect any of this when we signed the papers for this old farmhouse. It was bad, it was challenging, but through the fire, the dirt, and the endless challenges, it turned out to be exactly the life we were truly meant to live. And that is the incredible turning point of our whole story. The very things that almost broke us, the relentless pest invasion, the demanding wood stove, and the punishing reality of the garden, were exactly the things that forged us into stronger, more capable people. We thought we were moving here to relax. But what a twist! We actually moved here to go through an absolute trial by fire, and we would not trade a single day of it for a luxury penthouse in the city. The reality of country life is hard, dirty, and exhausting, but the reward is a sense of true independence that you cannot buy anywhere. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this wild journey with us. If you found value in our story, or just want to see what disaster we handle next on the homestead, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Now, I want to hear from you. After hearing the brutal truth about the mice, the mud, and the wood stove, would you still want to move to an old country farmhouse? Let us debate it down in the comments.